Roberto Durán and Sugar Ray Leonard fought for the first time in 1980, kicking off what would become an iconic rivalry in boxing. And while their second fight gets most of the attention due to its bizarre ending, their first encounter remains one of the most entertaining matches in boxing, and one of the best fights amongst the four kings. This is in no small part due to the drastic differences between the two fighters, in both style and personality. Durán was known as a brutal infighter. He was a skillful boxer whose skills were missed by many, overshadowed by his unrelenting savagery. Durán used grappling techniques to subdue his opponents, making use of his head, shoulders, and chest to wrestle them into corners, and guard manipulation is to slip in jarring punches from mere inches away. To quote Leonard, he did not defeat his opponents, he demolished them. Durán always went for the knockout, and was angry with himself and the world if he didn't get it. His rage controlled him as much as the other way around. In contrast, Leonard was the all-American charmer with the big smile, who boxed beautifully and danced to the tune of Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson. He was known for his movement and speed, and his footwork and rhythm were so refined, he could use them in lieu of a jab to set up powerful blows. When the fight was made, Durán only had a vague idea of who Sugar Ray Leonard was, but the more he learned of him, the more Durán developed an intense hatred for Sugar Ray. Durán saw Leonard as an undeserving young pretty boy who was getting the majority of the attention and money. In fact, the press were treating the fight as if Leonard had already won. Although he was moving up in weight, Durán still enjoyed a record of 71 wins to 1 loss, with 56 knockouts. But most of the boxing community, including Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Robinson, predicted that Leonard would easily win the fight. One of the few outliers was Cus D'Amato, who prophesied that if Durán has the will to apply his skills with determination and courage, he will neutralize Leonard's ability. By the time the two first met, Durán was already seething. He made the decision to play to his reputation, to portray himself as savage, crass, and uncivilized as possible. El Diablo, they called me, the devil. I wasn't going to do anything to make them think otherwise. Good versus evil, and I was the bad guy. But they could write what they liked about me. I couldn't read English anyways. Durán now embellished on this role, shoving food into his mouth like a starving animal, jabbing Leonard hard during the press photos, and throwing foul insult after foul insult. The final straw occurred at the weigh-in, when Durán told Leonard's wife that after he was done screwing Leonard, he was gonna screw her too. So by the time the first bell rang, destroying Durán was all Leonard had been thinking about for months.
The Modern Martial Artist is switching to YouTube memberships, putting all of our exclusive perks in one place for our most important sponsor, you. We need your support to continue creating content about the sports we love, and that's why we're excited to offer even more through YouTube memberships. The team is bringing you early video access and 2 exclusives each month. So, if you like what we do and want to see more, become a channel member today.
To quote the Hands of Stone himself, I pushed all of Leonard's buttons. I knew I could turn the fight into a brawl. It was meant to drive him crazy, and it worked. At first, Leonard tried to follow through on the game plan he had worked out with his team. The idea was to box Durán to death, moving from side to side and utilizing his large reach advantage to steer clear of the ropes. Leonard had even been taking tap dancing lessons to speed up his feet. The plan worked, but only for about 30 seconds. There was a huge problem with Leonard's plan to use his jab to establish distance. Very few of them were actually landing. Leonard would later praise Durán, saying he was a better boxer than he was given credit for, and he slipped punches almost as well as Benitez. Leonard was hitting air, but he had an even bigger problem. Durán loved to enter with a wide looping right, using it to clear his opponent's guard out of the way before coming up from underneath to secure a hold. At the same time, he would shift forward, weaving to stay safe, and using his right foot to cut off his opponent's escape. When Durán lived up to his expectation and did as expected, fully committing to his punches and weaving in wildly, Leonard was able to easily escape. But Durán was an intelligent boxer and well-versed in feinting punches to get his opponents to react the exact way he wanted them to. In the meantime, he himself remained entirely composed and well-balanced. By the end of the first round, it had become apparent that Durán could smoothly and easily follow Leonard's defensive movements by feinting and then following him, and Leonard was quickly running out of space to maneuver out of the way. By the second round, Durán was able to repeatedly pin Leonard against the ropes, trapping him and landing a barrage of sharp, tight body blows. This was Durán's plan, to spend the first 5 rounds making Leonard bear his weight and punishing his body, slowing his movements in the later rounds. And so far, Durán was the one executing his plan flawlessly. But it would not take 5 rounds for Durán's persistence to pay off. Only halfway through the second round, Durán nailed Leonard with a powerful lead hook that knocked him backwards. Because of Durán's preference for bull rushing, his opponents became highly reactive to level changes. Leonard would later note, Durán was the only boxer I ever saw who used his head to hit the speed bag. As such, Durán could effectively use a level change as a feint, like many in MMA do today. Durán had just executed this trick perfectly in order to set up the hook that shook Leonard. He changed head levels to get Leonard to react defensively, and then used that beat in the exchange to move in closer before throwing his punches. Leonard survived the round, and stood in his corner well before the bell rang for the third. He wanted to show Durán that he was still ready to fight. Durán had so enraged Leonard, he was ready to die rather than back down. But it would still take 3 more rounds for Leonard's head to completely clear. In the meantime, Durán picked him apart, showcasing his unique blend of wrestling and boxing. At one point in the third, Leonard was on the ropes for 30 seconds and took 17 punches without returning any. Like Henry Armstrong, Durán used his head and shoulders to knock his opponents off balance and drive them to the ropes. But Durán was as much a craftsman as he was a bully, and he could seamlessly weave left to right to rest his head on either of his opponent's shoulders. This kept him safe and set up new angles of attack. The technique was particularly effective for targeting his competitor's liver. Durán used this technique, and many others, to perform a symphony of destruction on Leonard. At times, Durán would even weave underneath Leonard's head, keeping his own head pinned to Leonard's chest and grinding his skull across his eyebrows. At the same time Durán was weaving between Leonard's shoulders, his hands were busy disrupting his guard and landing some of the tightest strikes in boxing. Durán could manipulate his opponents to create the smallest openings, and then land compact, jarring punches through those openings. Leonard would later explain that, each shot felt like a jackhammer being drilled into my skull. My teeth knocked back so hard, I had to push them into place with my gloves between rounds. But I showed something I had never needed to show before. I showed I could take a punch. Leonard proved he could take a punch once again in the beginning of the fourth, when Durán smoothly slipped his jab and returned a hard right that drove him into the ropes. When Leonard tried to go on the attack, Durán was able to rely on his superior counterpunching. But the biggest surprise to those watching around the world was that Durán seemed to have hands almost as fast, or maybe just as fast as Leonard's. Durán continued pressing forward and digging into Leonard's body throughout the round. Durán ended the round by taunting Leonard with his hands low, evading every punch Leonard threw in retaliation. He then secured an underhook and turned him back against the ropes, so he could unload on him again until the bell rang. Watching from the front row, Ray's wife started to bawl. Finally, in the fifth, something changed in Leonard. Leonard now refused to move backwards, getting low and wrestling with Durán, trying to match him at his own game. He took extreme risks, leaving himself open and enduring shots in order to land a few of his own. Many fighters would have been broken mentally by Durán's unrelenting pressure, but Sugar Ray's response was not to fade. It was to become enraged. "I couldn't tell you why," he would later say. "I think my fighting instincts just took over." Near the end of the round, he used his incredible speed to flurry, digging in a barrage of body hooks and uppercuts, just as his namesake did when he was in trouble years before. He was by no means winning, and Durán was evading most of his punches. But Sugar Ray was starting to hold his own. For the first time in the fight, the two looked evenly matched. The sixth was more of the same, with Leonard starting to rival Durán's wild savagery. Although Durán still proved difficult to hit, Leonard had effectively stunted the Hands of Stone's offense. Durán was too focused on defense at this point to land with the same consistency as he had in the earlier rounds. Leonard's ability to fight fire with fire was buying him much needed time to recover and get his bearings. In the 7th, Durán became more reckless as well, which led to one of the most entertaining, intense, and brutal rounds in boxing history. Both fighters threw everything they had into lightning-fast combinations. But this was no slugfest. Although both Durán and Leonard were being recklessly aggressive, they still displayed masterful defense, slipping, ducking, and blocking before immediately returning fire. At times, the fighters looked surprisingly similar, but the main difference was that Durán punched and grappled at the same time, whereas Leonard would look for a superior position and then pick what he felt was an opportune moment to flurry. When the round ended, all three judges scored the 7th even. But despite Leonard's efforts, he still had not managed to hurt Durán the same way Durán had hurt him. He'd later relate, "Despite my renewed determination, I didn't come close to hurting Durán. I missed my target over and over, and when I did land a strong combination or two, he would immediately land with an effective flurry of his own. If anything, the hits he took made him counter with greater fury, as if he actually enjoyed the pain." Over the last few rounds, Leonard had been surviving on pure willpower alone, but in the 8th, he began to develop effective techniques to stifle some of Durán's attacks. Leonard, either through experience or intuition, picked up on how Durán liked to switch hand positions to set up attacks. Durán liked to switch which hand was grappling and which hand was striking, and then take his opponent by surprise during the switch. So in response, Leonard kept changing his head position every time he felt Durán adjust, keeping his head safely tucked away from Leonard's free hand. Eventually, he realized he could time his shots off of this technique. Now able to somewhat stifle Durán's inside work, Leonard fought Durán at mid to long range, but just as Leonard was competent at inside fighting, Durán's head movement, feints, and rhythm allowed him to remain competitive from a greater distance. This was despite Leonard's massive 5-inch reach advantage. And even though Leonard was at his preferred range, he was still standing flat-footed and keeping his weight sunk low, looking to turn the fight into more of a brawl. From his corner, Leonard's coach pleaded with him to box. But Leonard had incredible movement, and although Durán had neutralized a lot of it through feints and wrestling, Leonard had seemed to throw the baby out with the bathwater, discarding the very tools that had brought him to the top. Neither man had stopped punching for the last 20 seconds of the round. By the end, Ray's wife had stopped crying, but only because she'd just fainted. By the 9th, the fight had truly transformed into one of the most complete fights in boxing history, with the fighters displaying all skill sets and moving seamlessly between all ranges. Both fighters were willing to fight anywhere, in any way, employing skillful defense with recklessly aggressive offense. Once again, all three judges scored this round even. In round 10, the momentum again shifted. If there was one thing that set Leonard apart from the rest of the Four Kings, it was his ability to adapt mid-fight. When Durán charged in, Leonard now sidestepped and pushed down on Durán's head to knock him off balance and turn him. Alternatively, Leonard would duck down even lower than Durán, forcing him to stop in his tracks for fear of slamming into Leonard's head. Now that Durán's wrestling had finally been dealt with, Leonard could focus on intelligent offense. With a second or two to breathe, Leonard could set up attacks and read Durán's movements. He caught Durán as he tried to duck away with a hard, chopping right. For the first time in the fight, Leonard had seriously hurt Durán. Perhaps it was fatigue, or perhaps it was this one well-landed punch, but Durán's speed would not be the same throughout the duration of the fight. As Sugar Ray walked back to his corner, he knew he had a surefire way to win the fight from here on out. With Durán's wrestling no longer as large of a threat, Leonard could spend the remaining 5 rounds dancing around Durán, outpointing him. But Durán's insults echoed around Leonard's head. He couldn't shake them. He needed to prove that he could not only beat Durán, but beat him at his own game. And so, the remaining rounds were not a display of beautiful boxing by Leonard. They were instead a desperate back-and-forth war, with constant shifts in momentum. Like the 7th, the 11th was non-stop action from start to finish. At times, both men seemed to discount defense entirely to focus on hitting the other. One man would be pummeling the other against the ropes 1 second, and then the other would suddenly and violently take control. The majority of boxers could not take this pace for more than a few rounds, and these two champions had fought at a tremendous pace for 11 rounds thus far, and still had potentially 4 more rounds to go. But far from slowing, they were just getting started. The 12th began with both men sharpshooting at long range before once again shifting to mid-range. Both fighters had their moments, but Durán ended up getting the better of more exchanges, and was dominant in the later half. After the round, he told his corner that was it. He knew he had won the fight. His corner admonished him, telling him it wasn't over yet. Don't let Leonard breathe. So in the 13th, Durán picked up where he had left off the last round, driving Leonard against the ropes. But then, Leonard turned him and attacked ferociously, backing Durán into a corner and connecting with hard, solid punches. Durán fought through though, and managed to rally, damaging Ray so greatly from against the ropes, he was forced to retreat to the center of the ring. But then, Ray once again got the upper hand, landing tearing, whipping punches that stopped Durán in his tracks. Neither man would back down, but while it had been Durán who had started the round strong, it was Leonard who had finished it. In the 14th, Leonard's endurance and speed came into play. While Leonard had been taking the majority of the body shots, it was Durán who had noticeably slowed. But still, Duran's relentless grind pressed Leonard towards the ropes, where Durán punished him with an endless barrage of body hooks and tight headshots. Durán may have slowed, but he was nowhere near close to stopping. He later explained, "In the past I've screwed around a lot before fights, spending a lot of money on drinking and women. Not this time. I realized how important this fight was, and I wasn't going to let anything distract me. This was my chance to make the world take notice that I wasn't going to blow it. I was in the best shape I'd ever been in." Near the end of the round, Leonard attempted one of his signature winding punches. Durán narrowly slipped it, but was caught by Leonard's follow-up hook. In their respective corners, Durán was confident to victory, while Leonard considered it a close fight. Not sure how the judges could score it, Leonard knew he could not afford to give up this last round. Leonard stood and signaled Durán to come at him, and Durán was eager to oblige. The bell rang, and the ref had to force both men to honor the tradition of touching gloves for the final round. By the time the round was halfway through, both men were gasping for air, pausing a few seconds to catch their breath before unloading with their hardest punches, even now looking for a last round knockout. In the final seconds, Leonard threw everything he had left at Durán, but Durán slipped every punch. Confident of victory, he danced and taunted Leonard until the final bell. Leonard raised his hands, and Durán shoved him one last time, enraged that he would dare claim he'd won the fight. The two men had begun the fight as bitter enemies, and nothing had happened to make that change. As Durán so elegantly put it, "As we touched gloves for the final round, I said, 'F you,' and then continued punching him and playing with him while dodging his punches. I knew I'd beat him. I told him I was more of a man than him. I could take more punches than he can. I'm a better boxer. He never hurt me. He hit me hard, but he never hurt me. I'm very strong." I insulted Leonard one more time, grabbed my crotch, and called him a shithead. Furious at Durán's behavior, Ray's brother rushed Durán. Durán knocked him out in one shot, but few noticed amidst all the confusion, and sadly, only the star of the incident was partially caught on camera. The judges' scores were being tallied, and both men awaited their respective fates. The results would impact both of their lives forever. Although it was a close fight, Durán was named the victor, and solidified himself as one of the true greats of boxing. Leonard was forced to taste defeat for the first time in his life. Durán would later explain, "I won because I made Leonard fight my fight. He was forced to box flat-footed, and in that way, I made him take big punches. He thought he was showing a lot of courage by taking so many. Maybe, but mostly, he was showing a good way to lose." Durán would return triumphant to Panama, where he had survived as a child eating garbage, to crowds of thousands and a life of wealth and fame. Although Leonard had made over 5 times more than Duran, the fight would have a terrible impact on his psyche. Put simply, Leonard was devastated. He had been certain he would defeat every opponent put in front of him, and then retire on top like Rocky Marciano, invincible forever. Now, he considered retiring early. But over the weeks, as the wounds healed and the pain lessened, he began to realize what had happened. Leonard had just been exposed to the results of psychological warfare. In his own words, "Never did another fighter penetrate my psyche as much as Duran, and there was nothing I could do about it. Understanding the essence of the opponent I was facing made it easier for me to beat the living daylights out of them, and then, when the fight was over, to show genuine empathy. With Duran, it wasn't until too late that I figured him out. He wasn't a madman. He only pretended to be one." Leonard decided that he did not need retirement. He needed a rematch. As it turned out, he would get one. And what transpired would shock the world. Five months after their first epic battle in Montreal, Roberto Durán and Sugar Ray Leonard stood in the ring together, ready to put it all on the line once again. What neither man knew at the time was that this fight would not go the distance. In fact, it was to have one of the most shocking conclusions in boxing history. In their last encounter, Durán had won a hard-fought decision, but Sugar Ray felt that he'd figured out exactly what had gone wrong. Well before the night of the fight, Durán had waged a sort of mental warfare on Leonard, saying everything he could to intimidate and infuriate him. The final straw had come at the weigh-in, when Durán told Leonard in front of his wife that after he was done screwing him in the ring, he was going to screw her too. Durán had delivered on his first threat, trapping Leonard against the ropes, landing a barrage of sharp, tearing body shots and tight, powerful uppercuts. Durán had used his head, shoulders, and chest to wrestle Leonard into corners and knock him off balance, and grappling techniques to manipulate Leonard's guard and slip in punches from mere inches away. But Leonard had come back mid-fight. He gave everything he had, going toe-to-toe with Durán and producing some of the best action ever seen in the ring. But when Leonard had finally gained some momentum, he decided to brawl rather than box. He had let Durán get inside his head, and the hands of stone took full advantage. Durán clowned Leonard the last round, shoved him after the bell, knocked out his brother when he tried to get revenge, took the decision, and went home to a parade of over 700,000 people in his honor. Leonard had not been happy. He had rewatched the fight every day, every night, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Once he felt he had his answer, he demanded a rematch. Both men had huge obstacles to overcome in training. Durán had spent the last several months partying like it was his job, and had gained around 50 pounds. He had just 1 month to lose it. After a bit more partying, he got to work. Sugar Ray needed to prepare himself physically and mentally. Leonard always looked in the mirror before his fights to see who stared back at him. Would it be Ray Leonard, an ordinary man, or Sugar Ray, the flawless boxer? Their first fight, Leonard had looked hard for Sugar Ray, but he was nowhere to be found. Weigh-ins came, and astonishingly, Durán made weight, having come down from around 200 pounds. He felt the most drained he'd ever felt in his life. Leonard was a different story. The night before the fight, he closed his eyes and started shadowboxing, letting his hands go faster and faster. When he opened his eyes and looked in the mirror, it was Sugar Ray who stared back at him. The bell rang, and now, finally, he would have his shot at redemption. From the beginning, it was clear to Durán that this was not the same fighter he had faced 5 months before. Leonard had some of the greatest footwork ever seen in the ring, and he was putting it to good use. Sugar Ray was layering feints on top of each other, changing directions multiple times, and always staying one step ahead of Durán. To accomplish this, Ray used a brilliant strategy. First, Leonard would feint, either with a jab or with a quick step of his lead foot. He would then change direction, knowing that Durán was a talented fighter who could easily follow. But then, once Durán had fully committed, Leonard would change direction a second time, throwing Durán entirely off balance. As an additional benefit, each time Durán committed to Leonard's first direction change, he opened up more space for Leonard to move back to the center of the ring. While in camp, Leonard had practiced circling away the second he felt the bottom strand of the ropes touch his calf. This tactile response essentially let him have eyes in the back of his head, allowing him to navigate the ring on instinct. Near the end of the round, Durán did manage to corner Leonard, but Leonard ducked under Duran's right, hooked his body to turn him, and pivoted out, putting Durán in the exact position he'd been hoping to put Leonard in. Now Leonard pressed Durán towards the ropes, forcing him back with a 1-2, landing a body jab, and rebounding off of his rear foot to land with a hard right to end the round. Heading back to his corner, Leonard was confident that the fight was going exactly as he'd planned. In the second round, Leonard took his domination one step further. He displayed a new ability to move, punch, grapple, and infight all at the same time. Again, Leonard had learned these new tricks in training. He brought in a new sparring partner who idolized Durán and imitated his style. This got Leonard accustomed to Duran's rough style of infighting. Leonard invited his new sparring partner to fight dirty, asking him to throw elbows, headbutt, and throw low blows. By the end of his camp, Leonard could fight in a phone booth. Leonard had a chance to showcase these new skills near the end of the round, when Durán jabbed and level changed, looking to enter in low and charge into Leonard. But Leonard anticipated this, and countered with a body hook and an overhand right. He then shuffled away before Durán could retaliate. Durán gave chase, switching into southpaw to follow Leonard, whose quick shuffle inside had moved him into a southpaw position as well. Leonard parried Durán's lead hook, stepped back, and pivoted into a lead hook of his own. He followed up with a right that Durán deflected off of his elbow. Durán was knocked off balance, but he wasn't one to give up easily. He readjusted and continued on with his attack, but Leonard was already L-stepping away, moving inside Durán's hook, changing direction, and countering with the left. Durán shifted forward again, this time managing to collar tie Leonard and pull him in tight, right where he wanted him. For all of his footwork, Leonard could not keep Durán at arm's length forever. But Leonard had spent weeks preparing for this, and snuck in a tight uppercut to Durán's jaw. Durán threw an uppercut of his own, but Leonard blocked it, tied up Durán, turned himself off the ropes, and landed another, harder uppercut. Durán wisely retreated to avoid the third. Leonard was showing that not only could he avoid the majority of Durán's attacks by staying at long range, but that he could also outscore him at close range. By keeping his free arm on the inside of Durán's, he could stifle his attacks, and pave a clear path for his own. Leonard again landed a powerful overhand right near the end of the round, and finished with two lightning-fast jabs that snapped Durán's head back. In his corner, Durán knew he needed to turn things around, and in the third, he did. Durán realized he couldn't fully commit to his attacks without Leonard leaving him in the dust, so he took his time cutting off the ring. He stayed lighter on his feet, stood more upright, and led with his jabs. Anticipating that Leonard would immediately dart away from any attack, Durán blocked his exit by controlling his hips, and then drove him into the ropes with his shoulders and head. But Leonard's improved inside work allowed him to hold his own. He was comfortable changing angles while clinching, and was using Durán's low center of gravity against him, pushing off of his head to turn him, and steering him into his punches. However, it was Durán who was landing the harder blows by far, slipping many of Sugar Ray's flurries and punishing his ribs. In the fourth, the battle continued to be waged on the inside. In the first serious exchange of the round, Durán entered with a 1-2, slipping inside of Leonard's counter jab. Leonard turned his punch into a collar tie, but Durán took advantage of the opening this created by spearing Leonard hard in his exposed ribs. Leonard straightened his arm to smother Durán, and then wrapped his arm to pull Durán into an uppercut. But Durán turned away. Both men threw at the same time, both missing. Then both men threw an uppercut, both landing. Then each man tried to flurry, but again, both were too slippery, their reflexes honed through years of intensive practice. It seemed like for every punch one fighter landed, the other would land an equally devastating blow. Heading into the fifth, Durán felt he had Leonard figured out, and that he could do some real damage if he kept up the pressure. But the weight cut was starting to have an effect on him. He was breathing hard, his arms felt heavy, and they were not even a third of the way through the fight. He decided he needed to finish it now, and put everything he had into this last round. Durán was patient at first, taking his time to set up his attacks. Then he turned savage. He charged into Leonard so hard that he was knocked off of his feet. Durán maintains to this day that it was a knockdown, but the ref counted it as a slip. Near the end of the round, Durán managed to pin Leonard against the ropes and brutalized him. He countered Leonard's tight uppercuts with lead hooks, tore into his body with tremendous pounding punches, and ended with a perfect cross to Leonard's temple, tracking his head movement as he tried to weave away. Leonard had taken a pounding, but Durán had expelled a lot of energy, and now he was feeling it. From his corner, Leonard tried to find a way to turn the fight around. He had noticed something during the last 3 rounds that he'd not picked up on in their first fight. Durán was watching Leonard's feet to time him, reading his rhythm, and using it to set up punches. Leonard decided he needed to better disguise his movements. He squared up his body as he circled around the ring. This was dangerous as it left him entirely exposed, but it also aided lateral movement. Leonard darted from side to side, breaking his rhythm and varying up his tempo, doing everything he could to remain unpredictable. It was working. Durán was tired and was unable to catch Leonard the way he had the previous rounds. But every time Leonard tried to land anything other than a jab, he would get tied up and speared in the ribs. Leonard was keeping distance, but not doing nearly enough to really hurt Durán. After the bell, he walked back to his corner, frustrated. To quote Leonard, as the bell sounded for the 7th, Durán was not close to being seriously hurt. It was up for grabs. I assumed I was ahead, but not by nearly enough, and there were 9 rounds left to go. One good poke, and it could turn in Durán's direction. Leonard was right. As of the 7th, the judges had him slightly ahead by only a few points. And through the first half of the 7th, Durán continuously caught Leonard with well-placed shots. That's when Leonard remembered something that his brother Roger, the same brother that Durán had punched out at the end of their last fight, had suggested to him during camp. He had told Leonard that he needed to provoke and embarrass Durán. Make fun of him, he had said, and he won't know how to handle it. Make fun of Durán? Leonard had asked. The man was a killer. But now, suddenly, Leonard decided it couldn't hurt to give it a try. And so, Leonard set out to enrage Durán. He repeatedly stuck his chin out and moved away before Durán could catch him. He danced and taunted, just as Durán had done the last round of their first fight. And Durán responded exactly the way Leonard had thought he would. Already tired, Durán's punches became wild and clumsy, and his timing was thrown completely off. But Leonard wasn't done. He wound up his backhand as if to throw a bolo punch, but instead he threw a jab. The crowd roared, laughing at the great Roberto Durán. The man that Frazier had compared to Charles Manson was now a laughingstock, the butt of the joke. Recalling the 7th years later, Durán would explain, "Of course I was frustrated, because I wanted to box, not dance salsa or play like a clown. I motioned him to come fight me, but he kept dancing. That's not boxing." Durán was furious. Of course, Durán's emotional, unrefined punches only made it easier for Leonard. He drove Durán into his shots, and then ended with an Ali shuffle. Durán had practiced psychological warfare in their first fight, essentially beating Leonard before the fight had begun. Now, Leonard had found a way to do the same during the fight, not with his words, but with his actions. After the bell, Leonard's coach begged him to stop clowning, scared he would get caught being reckless. Leonard agreed, but it didn't matter. Durán had already felt drained from the 50-pound weight cut, and now he had received an entirely new kind of damage. Durán's pride had been hurt, and he could not get back into the fight. Leonard had humiliated Durán in the 7th, and now, in the 8th, he would do to his body what he'd done to his pride. Leonard scored repeatedly on Durán, who was so infuriated, tired, and embarrassed that he seemed to have lost half of his skill in a single round. Sugar Ray landed nearly everything he threw, moving in and out and escaping off angle before Durán could do any real damage. With half a minute left in the round, Durán decided he'd had enough. In one of the most shocking moments in all of sports history, Roberto Durán, record of 72-1 with over 50 knockouts, the hands of stone, one of the toughest, meanest men to ever enter the ring, walked away, raised up his hand, and quit. Leonard, believing it must be a trick, rushed in and kept fighting, but Durán signaled he wanted none of it. The referee, thinking he must be misunderstanding Durán, motioned for them to fight. That was when Durán uttered the now famous phrase, "No más." Durán wanted no more. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about exactly why Durán quit. Durán has always held that he was simply too drained and that he was suffering from cramps, having eaten 2 steaks before the fight. Leonard has always held that he humiliated Durán, and his ego simply couldn't take it. Perhaps the most interesting take on No Mas comes from one of his greatest admirers, Mike Tyson, who believes that Durán showed great courage in admitting defeat, and that sometimes it's more honorable to throw in the towel, rather than continue on needlessly. Whatever Durán's reasons for quitting, he had never considered the consequences. Durán had gone from scrounging for food in the garbage bins as a child to a national hero, but now he was seen as an outcast, a traitor to his people. Everyone but his family would abandon him, and it would be a long, dark road back to glory. Leonard, having avenged his one loss, set himself on a collision course with one of the most powerful boxers in history, the Hitman, Thomas Hearns.